Well, good morning and welcome to London. I'm Michael Mainelli. I'm one of the directors of Zien, and I'm here welcoming Duncan Cockburn from OneBanks. Now, Duncan and I met at a very interesting dinner at Mansion House, where the First Minister of Scotland was speaking, and I was very, very intrigued with his ideas, and I thought it'd be really good to have a London, Scotland webinar, but he has flummoxed me by flying out to Alicante. So this is a London Spanish webinar, at least temporarily. Duncan's here to talk with us today about digital banking for analog customers. And you've got to say, having had 40 plus years of the digitization or even digital of banking and finance, what the heck have analog customers got to do in the modern day and age? And you may find this a bit surprising. As you know, I am Michael Mainelli, but I can only do this lecture thanks to the support of all of our various sponsors who allow us to range widely and freely across technology, economics, and finance. And in a world where we are trying to solve 17 sustainable development goals, one of which is very much SDG 10, ensuring that there's all sorts of inclusion in finance, I think it's interesting to recognize the scale of the analog problem, if you want to call it that, or in Duncan's case, the scale of the analog opportunity, which I think is really going to be quite telling. As ever, today's program is fairly straightforward. I'm here to get out of the way as quickly as possible so you can hear from our expert. Duncan's going to speak for about 20 minutes, and there's a substantial amount of time left for Q&A. So to answer three obvious points, yes, this is being recorded, and the recording will go up in approximately 2 working days, so probably Friday afternoon, to share with friends and family and colleagues. Secondly, the slides are available, in fact are available already, but will be up there as well for those who want to look at them in detail. And finally, how do you participate in the Q&A? Well, the important thing about these webinars is the ability to chat to our guest. Simply type your message into the chat room. All of the messages that you type in will be sent to Duncan. So if you want to thank him or compliment him, or you want a point of detail, just type it in there. He will get all of those with your email attached, which makes it easy for him to get into correspondence with you if you so wish. Anyway, those are the sort of the housekeeping rules. But just to set the scene briefly, when the pandemic hit, we were told that something like nearly 6 million UK adults had done their first online banking experience. That was an amazing number. In fact, it said how low the penetration rate really was and how poor perhaps the marketing of our various banks has been over decades of trying to move people into online banking. But in preparation for this, Duncan's got a few questions of his own. I was just curious, what percentage of UK consumers have not visited a bank branch since March 2020? So please have a go here. I think you'll find this a very interesting one. Great. Well, over half the audience have voted Duncan. You'll find that our audience is really quite opinionated, or sure of themselves, or both. But we're going to close that and have a quick look at the results. And people believe that 80% have not visited a bank branch. That's the most. Actually, believe it or not, the answer is much lower. I was surprised it was still 20%. Yes, 20% of UK consumers haven't visited a bank branch in over 2 years. But we'll move on to that. Even that says to you that there's still a large amount of opportunity in this space. So Duncan, the floor is very much yours.
Thank you, Michael. I'm just going to share my screen very quickly. Apologies. There we go. So, as Michael said, I'm here to talk about digital banking for analog customers, and actually I'm quite pleased by the response that everybody gave there, because it is incredible. It shows how many people still use branches. 80% of people still have been to a branch since the start of the pandemic, through a time where face-to-face bank interaction has been completely limited. It shows there's still a real drive for that in-person banking experience. So I'm going to start with a quick poll, and it's going to go against a wee bit what Michael said, and actually think about, okay, so before the pandemic, one of the biggest banks we spoke to, the head of retail banking, and they told us that 30% of their customers had yet to sign up to online banking. After the pandemic, what do you think the number is now? Do you think it's between 0 and 10%, 10 and 20%, 20 to 25, or more than 25%. I was certainly really surprised by this one. Before the pandemic, it was 30%. What percentage do you think it is now post-pandemic? Right, so the majority think it's 25% plus. So the majority of you are right. It is in fact still close to 30%. So the conversion rate for this specific bank has been very minimal, even throughout a pandemic where face-to-face transactions are limited and people have been almost forced to move online. A lot of people simply are not moving digital, and it is a huge problem in society. A lot of people still like and value in-person banking transactions. Can I just double check? You can see my screen again.
Yes, we can.
Yes,
and actually, folks, I think what Duncan and I are showing you is that it is a complex situation out there with a very hard nugget of analog customers.
Yeah, and this bank in particular is having a really tough time to move that percentage of people over to online banking. So there needs to be a better way, otherwise the risk of digital exclusion is just getting bigger and bigger. So to give you context to OneBanks, I started OneBanks around 2.5 years ago. And funnily enough, it was actually all about sort of physical and analog, sort of phygital in effect, whereby I learned how to code. And I was fascinated by open banking and what that can enable customers to do in terms of it enables all banks to be in a single interface. It enables customers to choose who they share the data with. And it ultimately is there to increase competition, innovation, and to drive better outcomes for customers. However, one of the biggest sticking points in my head was that you needed online banking to use open banking. And that means that all of these people that we've just mentioned, these 30% of people, or potentially if you think about the whole of the UK, there's still 11.9 million people, which is 22% of the population, who lack the digital skills needed for everyday life. So when you think about online banking, open banking, and how people are thinking about it helping the poverty premium, actually it's leaving a lot of people behind. But yet at the same time, it's got so much potential because it does enable a single interface to aggregate all of the banks and do transactions on behalf of the banks, and in effect create a decentralized financial economy. So you've got that's the technical side, and then you've got the physical side. I'm from Scotland, as Michael said, and in the Highlands of Scotland, where my family are from, banks are closing all over the place, and you can see quite clearly, and I'm sure a lot of you in the audience can relate to somebody who still wants that in-person banking experience. And when branches close, it leaves a lot of people behind, whether it's elderly people who want face-to-face transactions, whether it's businesses who need to deposit cash. Branches closing are having a devastating impact on communities. So that's why I think, and that's what came to OneBanks in effect, is trying to drive a solution to create a sustainable solution for the high street. And if I just bring this together a wee bit, so branches closing is a problem for the banks. Ultimately, profits, banks are under profitability headwinds. Branches close on costs on average around £590,000 a year. So you understand that the 6,000 bank branches that are still in the UK, many of which are not economically viable because of that cost, and ultimately the declining number of people using it. However, at the same time, the government and the regulators are clamping down on branch closures, which means that the banks are almost stuck between a bit of a rock and a hard place, whereby they need to be moving to digital. However, they still need to service all of their customers, and so many of their customers still need that in-person banking experience. So there's a real challenge there for the banks. And obviously, as I just explained there, and one of the reasons why I started OneBanks in the first place is because of the problem for society. Millions of people, as I said, 11.9 million people are left, do not have the skills for digital banking and are being left behind. A lot of people still use that branch as a way to connect with digital and connect with banking, and without it, they are at risk of being left behind. As I said, people are deprived of the essential financial services due to branch closures, whether that is in-person banking or whether that's simply access to cash, and it's resulting in customers, as small businesses as well, having to travel further to do their everyday banking transactions. And especially in the back of COVID, I think it's really important that we try and minimize travel time. We try and get businesses back so they're not having to disrupt their everyday life and potentially miss out on revenue. And if you think about other industries, the sharing economy is driving traction all across the industry. So you think about Uber, WeWork, even Selfridges, for example. All of these industries are driving the sharing economy, and why doesn't that happen in the banking industry as well? I think it makes a huge amount of sense, and that's ultimately what OneBanks using open banking is trying to drive, whereby all banks being present in one single location, and it's a solution to help solve the problem for the banks, but also solve the problem for society. So that, as I said, is what OneBanks is all about. It's a bank agnostic solution that helps all customers, if it's an individual, an SME, you can come and interact at a OneBank site in person with a person and integrate with all of your underlying banks. So we're not a bank, we're a technology platform, and our mission is to try and help enable the financial institutions like the banks to maintain or broaden a cost-efficient physical presence, connecting the digital world with the physical one and ensure that nobody's left behind. And I'll bring this to life just a little bit. So these are the 3 kiosks that we've got open at the moment in cooperative stores in Scotland. The first one's in Denny, which was our first kiosk, and subsequently in Fife and Kilwinning on the right-hand side. And all of these kiosks have been built with the reasons why people go to the branch in the first place. You've got a seating area, you've got an over-the-counter transaction, and you've got a self-service solution. And it's all been built as a journey. So ultimately, irrespective of your digital skills, how competent you are, you can come to a OneBanks kiosk, you can get help get onto online banking, and it moves all the way through to you're competent, you can do it yourself, and you just do it on a self-service basis. But we're trying to provide that support for people all across the journey. And to give you an example, we had a 94-year-old man, for example, sign up to online banking for the first time at a OneBanks kiosk, simply because he wanted to use cash, simply because he didn't trust online banking and he needed that support to do it in person. And that in-person support, I think, makes such a big difference. As I said, we are a technology company, so we can range our solutions are completely dependent to what the community needs. So if a community needs a self-service solution, so it's not a bigger community, for example, it'll be a self-service solution, and that can range all the way through to a full branch, and anything in between. It's a SME focused solution, or as I said, these kiosks, which are currently situated within supermarkets. I think it's really important to do this in the heart of the community. So these co-ops, for example, are right in the heart of the community where people already go, and it helps enable customers to do transactions however, wherever, and whenever they want in locations, as I said, they already go to. So the transactions that people currently do at a OneBanks kiosk, and the core is everyday banking transactions. That's what we're trying to focus on right now. So currently it's access to cash is a huge problem in the UK, and that's why a lot of our focus right now has been on trying to drive solutions within access to cash. That's to cash deposits, cash withdrawals, bill payments, and I'll come on to how we're doing it differently and innovatively in a little bit. So the core of OneBanks, and how I like to describe OneBanks, is trying to solve the physical problem with a digital solution. And it comes to the title of this presentation, which is Digital Banking for Analogue Customers. Two sets of things which are worlds apart, but actually, as we move forward, I believe that they need to go hand in hand in order to create sustainable solutions for both access to cash and the digital divide. If you focus on just the access to cash problem, with incumbent solutions that are already there, the digital divide is just going to get worse. And as I said, that 11.9 million people are going to be left behind. If you focus just on the digital divide, digital solutions like open banking, you're at risk of leaving so many people behind when it comes to access to cash. And that's why having them both together and recognizing that both are part of the same problem is really important. And as Michael said earlier, we see this as an opportunity. There's still 5-6 million people who are completely dependent on access to cash and needing cash for their everyday life. And that is also the biggest problem for the banks when it comes to the digital divide. So using that section of the population as almost as a conduit to help people move digital, using cash as a conduit to help people move people digital, I think is a really powerful way to try and solve both of these problems. So I'm going to go into a wee bit more detail as to what actually OneBanks are doing to innovate in this space to support Analogue customers. As I said at the beginning, open banking was introduced in the first place to try and provide customers with more control over who they share their data with. to allow third parties to be the face of the customer while still interacting with the underlying bank, whether it's to share data, whether it's to initiate payments. And it is driving that concept of decentralized finance, whereby customers are interacting with lots of different fintechs, for example, to drive better outcomes. And that's happening in so many different areas of fintechs, whether it's payments, whether it's insurance, intermediation, all of that. It's not happening enough within the cash space. And that's what we're trying to push, is this concept of decentralized finance, whereby OneBanks can be the face of the customer whilst enabling all of the banks to be present within that one location, and enabling customers, as I say here, to transact however, wherever, and whenever they want. So I've split this up into three main components. The first one's identity. Now just have a think, how do you withdraw cash at the moment? How do you access cash? You access cash with your card. In the UK, there's no digital identity. In some other countries like the Nordics or Estonia, there's a digital identity, and that can create a huge amount of innovation, but we don't have that in the UK. To withdraw money, independent ATM deployers need to access the bank's identity to authenticate customers, and the only way they can do that is through chip and PIN. Again, if you just take a step back and think about other countries, for example, in Europe, in Latin America, people can withdraw money using biometrics, using QR codes, a wide range of different ways of authenticating customers, because there's a huge amount of innovation happening in that authentication space. But the fact that independent ATM deployers are not able to access the core identity that's owned by the bank is really limiting. So what open banking has enabled OneBanks to do is onboard customers. So customers onboard to the OneBanks profile, that allows us to manage the identity. And that allows us to allow people to withdraw money, deposit money, using a QR code, using biometrics, for example, or manually signing in. And while that might not sound quite that exciting, to me it's so exciting, because we are moving potentially towards a less cash society where cash is decreasing, but also everybody's moving towards cardless. I certainly don't carry my card on me much anymore. So we might move to a society which is cardless but not yet cashless, and the current UK infrastructure is not prepared for that shift. Using what we're doing and sort of the decentralization of identity drives solutions in this way, and also it helps support a wide range of transactions. So not only can cash suppliers do just withdrawals, we can do deposits, bill payments, a lot more transactions in that single location. And what enables us to do that is, again, driven by identity. We can do transaction risk monitoring. So any transaction that happens at a OneBank site, we can monitor, and owning that identity allows us to do that, and allows us to do bank agnostic deposits, for example, which has never been done in the UK before, other than at the post office. Secondly is data. So we allow customers to share their bank account information with us, which allows them to have an aggregated view of all of their bank account transactions, history, balances. And again, customers still go to a branch to view their balance. They still do. They still go and want to speak to someone and have help to do that. So by us driving a solution that allows them to very easily check their bank account balances, transactions, either at a OneBanks kiosk or on their own mobile app, helps them engage with more digital solutions that are, again, better for them. And then the second point with data is it allows customers to share their bank account information, again, helping us to facilitate seamless cash deposits and reduces the risk of manual error or fraud. And then the last point I've got here is, again, an open banking related point, whereby open banking within payment initiation service providers, it allows us to initiate payments. Currently, all of the payment infrastructure for withdrawals goes through Link, and it goes through one standard set of withdrawing money. However, we've built a solution that sits on top of faster payments using open banking, and that allows us so much innovation when it comes to leveraging what's coming. There's a huge amount happening within the payment space, whether that's confirmation of payee or request to pay. There's a lot that can continue to develop the user experience and change the way in which people interact with the banks, that we can continue to leverage and change that and develop that experience. And I think by having a wide range of customer experiences, changing the way people interact with the bank, with cash, is again a really good way of helping people move digital, a really good way of using digital solutions, innovation, but making it and scaling it right back to supporting analog customers and trying to address that problem that we've described before, which is the risk that they're going to be left behind, and trying to ensure that digital solutions are part of the answer. And from a bank's perspective, as I said, the banks have got a problem, and we are here to try and help the banks help their customers. And we do believe that the banks have got a unique opportunity leveraging cash and the sharing economy and shared infrastructure banking to embrace decentralized solutions in order to drive innovation and competition to help their customers access to cash, but also to move digital at the same time. So just to bring it back to sort of where we are as a company, OneBanks, as I said, we've been doing it for 2.5 years now. We initially went live in Denny and two other sites. We've recently gone live with a bank, which is being announced next week, which is very exciting, and a paid pilot. And we're also launching self-service solutions within Newcastle Building Society later this year. All of this has been against the backdrop of the industry working towards shared infrastructure. There's been lots of trials that have been happening, and recently the industry has it's a landmark agreement whereby the 8 biggest banks in the UK have agreed to support shared economy going forward within banking. So later this year, there'll be a rollout of solutions, whether it's OneBanks. Hopefully OneBanks will play a big part of it, but it'll enable single locations. Customers can go to the single location and do their banking irrespective of who they bank with. So it's a great recognition that the banks have got that shared infrastructure is the way forward, and they've committed to rolling it out. Again, this is against the backdrop of legislation. The government have played an important part in ensuring that banks cater for everybody, and as part of the latest Financial Services and Markets Bill, they have recently supported and have got a draft legislation to ensure that access to cash deposits and cash withdrawals is all across the UK in all of the cold spots. So that's our focus over the next few years, is to be rolling out as many solutions as we can, ranging from self-service all the way through to branch solutions, catered to exactly what the community needs. And we're so excited that the industry has moved with us, and we're very proud to have helped pioneer what is fundamentally a significant shift in the industry. As we develop, we'll continue to add services. So whether that's people wanting to do checks, whether it's wanting, open banking is moving towards open data and open finance, and that's really exciting because it helps potentially us to intermediate products, investments. Again, we're not a bank, but people come to branches for so many different reasons. I know my sister, for example, recently with her fiance, now husband, a few weeks ago, went to open a bank account, a joint account. She waited in a queue in a branch, and she was told she had to do it online, and it was really disappointing because she wanted that experience. And I think that's what we're trying to get to, is if we can open bank accounts, for example, as well, we can develop the range of services that we provide the customers such that actually people want to come to the branch. Right now, it's the banks are almost being forced to roll out solutions, but over time, as I said, we want to build almost the Apple experience of banking, whereby people want to go to the branch to learn more about what the latest innovation is, whether that's CBDC, whether that's blockchain, whatever it is. Right now it's open banking, right now it's payments, and that's what we're trying to democratize finance and make it available to everybody. Open banking is huge in the UK. The UK have been at the forefront of the development of open banking. However, it's gaining traction globally. And I know from a OneBanks perspective, we get a huge amount of interest from Latin America, from Europe. Just to put into context, in Europe, there's 5 times more branches per person than there is in the UK, which means the problem we're facing right now in the UK is going to happen in Europe very soon as well. As cash continues to diminish, as people don't go to branches as often and use online banking, there's a massive infrastructure problem, and driving shared infrastructure, leveraging open banking is the answer. I think there's so much more that can be done within open banking to make it more accessible, but it's developing, and it continues to develop into the solution that I think can underpin cash globally to drive and help people move digital. And just to summarize, so as I said, going back to the beginning, this is about how digital banking can be used to support analog customers. And the future is digital. The future is physical and digital together. It's about combining digital solutions to help us solve physical problems. It's about having people there as well to help, because trust is a huge issue, and having people there from local communities that people already know and trust really helps with that engagement. To put it into context, 10% of OneBanks customers, 9% I think it is now, never had online banking before signing up to OneBanks. So if we go back to that initial question I said at the beginning, that big bank in the UK, 30% before the pandemic never had online banking. Post-pandemic, it's still 30%. Compare that to OneBanks. 10% of our customers never had online banking before signing up to OneBanks. That is the digital conversion that society needs. And as we go forward, I think a shared economy, allowing people to access banking services without the need of cards or smartphones, supporting free access to cash and more sustainable solutions, and providing customers with solutions and banking services however, wherever and whenever they need it is fundamental as we go forward. Thank you for listening, and I'd love to answer any questions that you've got.
Well, Duncan, that was a very compelling presentation, and in fact, there are quite a few questions, so we'll pile into it if we could. I'm going to start off with one, just a quick answer, but Ian Taylor opened up very, very early on with, to what extent do you believe the inability or unwillingness of bank branches to offer any meaningful service at all has actually been part of the problem? There never seems to be anything they can do, so closure becomes self-fulfilling. You know, are the banks falsely driving people towards online?
Yes, to a certain extent, yes. I think how I see a bank branch historically has been, you go into a bank branch, however small, however big your problem is, and you expect to come out with your problem solved. Mm-hmm. And I think that is certainly how I see a bank branch, and what I think a bank branch should be is you go in and you get your problem solved, and you don't get sent to do it online, because you should never feel forced to do something. I do think that there is still, as going back to your original question, Michael, 80% of people have used a bank branch since the start of the pandemic. So there's still a big appetite for bank branches, for in-person experiences. And I think there is still a big opportunity for the banks to do more in the space to service customers. But fundamentally, it's not economically viable. As I said, it costs £590,000 a year. However, doing it on a shared infrastructure basis at a fraction of that cost can hopefully help change their mindset, whereby they think of it more as an opportunity, a strategic tool, rather than a cost. So that's the shift that we're trying to make.
There's an interesting point. Dan Feeney opened up very early on what banking services can be done in these hubs, and I think to some degree you actually answered a large chunk of his question, but it leads, I think, onto two things. I mean, none of us are as expert as you in this space. What transactions that we would normally think of as being a branch transaction, say 10 years ago, are you not able to do, or what are some of the transactions that are on the borderline? You maybe don't have them in the kiosk at the moment, but you might in the future.
Right now we're quite focused on access to cash, so we can do cash deposits, cash withdrawals, coins, notes, bill payments, and we help people get signed up to online banking. Our product roadmap is huge, and it's so much opportunity for things that we can do going forward, which is both stuff that we can develop in-house, the likes of product intermediation, but we can also partner with the likes of Citizens Advice to actually bring in partners to help deliver some of the services. Ultimately, our product roadmap is driven both by the customers, the banks who pay for the service, but also consumers, and trying to fit that gap.
What will you not do that people would think was?
Right now, what people come in and they want to open bank accounts with Barclays, with Lloyds. We can't do that at the moment, so we need to work with the banks over the next few years to be able to enable that. Fundamentally, there's no service that we can't provide with the bank support. So over time, with the appropriate amount of bank support, we'll be able to provide all services that a customer would expect. However, we're still on the journey, and we still need to sort of engage and develop the service offering. Because as I said, right now the focus is on access to cash, and that's the main.
Dan had a supplementary question, which is a good one here. Do you offer digital skills learning on site?
Yeah. So actually our kiosk team members, I say kiosk team members, they're actually digital educators, and we hire them to be digital educators, and that's really fundamental to their role in the community. It's not just helping with doing transactions, but it's also that educational piece. So we hire a lot of us team members, digital educators, used to work in a bank. We've also been working closely with the banks and got some of their online banking tools, education leaflets to actually help us help their customers.
Mm. Okay. Uh, Back in 2000, there was something called the Cruikshank Review, which had a very serious look at the banking sector. And one of the problems they were looking at is why was it so concentrated in the UK? And leaving aside issues of centralization and consolidation and government policy and lack of enforcement of competition law and a few other things. Nevertheless, one of the other problems was that even after a customer had been terrible service, they'd been made bankrupt because a bank had gotten its accounts wrong, or they had been overseas and thrown into a Turkish jail for using a credit card that wasn't working. They would then finally decide to change their bank. And 80% of them made their decision on what was the closest branch to them. So you circled around the same large 4-branch networks. Now, Mark Duff says here, banking is based on trust. If you have a branch, the customer can go to the branch and get access to the cash. So the reason for the lack of support for electronic banking is the electronic bank will stop trading if cloud-based banking, say Amazon Web Services, stops working. So that might be one issue. And I'd like to tack on to that a comment, if I could, from Tanji Morgan. Tanji, who knows banking extremely well, says that there's an assumption in your talk that the internet infrastructure is stable and available to everyone to use digital banking. She prefers in-person options, as using these annoying chat boxes or long wait periods to ultimately get lackluster call center employees. It is a problem. So very interested in your model. But last, the now regular outages of bank apps is something that needs to be considered. So I guess this is a question really about internet and system stability.
It's quite a fundamental question. I mean, open banking uses modern technology. It doesn't leverage a lot of the legacy technology the banks have. So sometimes there are outages within the banks. It doesn't impact open banking. That said, open banking is not perfect, and there are still some hiccups within some of the banks within open banking that create outages. But it is, as I said, using the latest technology and is a lot more, I think, sustainable, and it doesn't have quite as many issues potentially going forward. Certainly from OneBanks' perspective, our technology is all hosted on the cloud, and that is different to most other independent ATM deployers. Most other independent ATM deployers have the technology bubbled up in the cloud, so you can't change the code or anything like that, whereas the way in which we deploy it is actually using an iPad and using a cash box. So the iPad is the interface, and that's really important when it comes to being able to make changes on a regular basis, to be able to diagnose anything. If there is a problem, we can really quickly work out what it is and change it. And also from an accessibility perspective, using an iPad, you can deploy it on a big screen, a small screen, you can zoom in, it's wheelchair accessible. There's a lot of benefits in that setup as well. Going back to your other point, Michael, I find it fascinating what you said about how, what was it, 80% of customers don't change their bank. Or 80% choose their bank based on where the nearest branch is. That actually showcases the opportunity that there is in in-person banking. Certainly, from my perspective, I'm with RBS. The reason I'm with RBS is because it's at the bottom of the road. I still think a lot of people think like that, and that's why I'm hoping that OneBanks does become more of a strategic opportunity for the banks over time.
Well, oddly, I'm with RBS since the late 80s, and I had never been to my branch ever. Even since then, not even to set up the account, and the branch has since closed. That said, I have used other RBS branches, but I'm certainly out there. Now, we've got a lot of support here, and I want to touch on the support, but then I want to turn to some of the answers. So, Charles Somerin, says that if only 20% are online, this is a digital culture challenge, and he agrees open banking is part of the future, but the industry is not moving. Charlotte Dober-Ashley was curious, have banks been supportive as has there been pushback? I think probably I'm going to give Dan the floor on this one. Dan is curious, which of the CMA 9, so these are the 9 banks participating in open banking, the larger ones in the UK, has been most receptive to your platform?
We've been working very closely with actually all of the banks. Obviously, it was mandated for the CMA 9 banks, but there's far more banks out with the CMA 9 that have engaged with open banking, and obviously we facilitate more like the neobanks as well, the likes of Monzo, Revolut, Tide, etc. at our kiosks at the moment. Who've engaged the most? I'd say all of the banks that have participated within the Community's Access to Cash pilots. So when we started, there was an industry-wide pilot that was I think it was this 6 or 7 biggest banks. They came together and they funded pilots in different communities. We were a startup at the time, so we weren't one of the funded pilots, and it was actually more focused on incumbent solutions. The bigger players, however, that helped us get recognised in the whole industry. And certainly they have been the most receptive. But going back to your earlier point, it has been very slow moving. We're a startup, we're trying to run, we're keen to run and try and get as many up and running as quickly as possible. But we have been sort of subject to waiting for the pilots to come to a close, waiting for the industry to commit to rolling out shared banking, waiting for the legislation to be announced, which was promised a few years ago. So it has taken longer than we want, but we are excited about the 2 years ahead, because we are in a position now where the industry, the 8 or 9 biggest banks have committed to rolling out shared banking. Yeah, so I'd say most of the banks have been very supportive. There's one bank in particular who we're going live with that'll be announced on Monday, so keep your eyes posted on that. And that's actually on a white label basis. So that's us providing technology, cash deposit, cash withdrawal functionality within their existing pop-up site to enable their customers only to do transactions. So that's another good use case of what we've built.
Okay. Well, Dean Nicholson compliments you. Great use case, very clever solution to an old problem with the new technology. He's curious, so what do you do about fully legacy customers who walk in so they don't have digital access to their underlying bank? You know, how do I get onto these open banking rails? I don't have a mobile number, perhaps, or I don't have a user password or manual sign-on, or I have absolutely.
It's a fantastic question, and it's actually something that us as a business, our mission is to help try and drive financial inclusion. A solution on day one isn't perfect. I recognise that. However, over the last year and a half, we've developed it for a huge amount. So when we went live, customers needed online banking to use our service. Right now, customers, you can do deposits, you can do bill payments without online banking. And we're literally 1 month away of introducing card-based withdrawals as well over the counter. So that's been a huge focus of ours, is to make it more and more accessible over time. We are promoting people to move digital, but we do recognise that there's still people who can't and won't move digital, and we still need to cater for their needs. And that's what we've spent quite a lot of time over the last year implementing, and we'll continue to do that.
I'm curious on this one. So, you know, marketing theory says, you know, you should never really let anybody get in between you and your customer. So we've got OneBanks, we've got a very strong logo here. Nick Bush says kiosk banking isn't new. Banks have had tiny and mobile branches for years. What's prevented them from adopting a similar solution? I would argue, from what I've seen here, they consider this to be a minor area, or they underrate it, and they're prepared to outsource it to you on the understanding that it's going to be a joint outsourcing, a bit like Link in a way. They thought absolutely that issue, so we'll give it to Link, and we'll keep Link under control because we don't want to get out of it. But as long as we're all doing the same thing, that's there. So do you agree with that model? And if so, then I move on to another question.
Yeah, just quickly, why hasn't it been done before? The banks have tried to do this sort of thing before. There was a shared business banking hub. 3 of the banks, Barclays, NatWest and Lloyds, came together to try and do a business banking hub. Fundamentally, trying to get the banks to work together is now impossible. And we would never have been able to get to where we are today if we were having to try and collaborate with the banks. And the only reason we've been able to get to where we are is through open banking and building it and proving it works, and then trying to engage the banks. So the open banking and the opportunity that's given us to prove it works, it has been fundamental. And also the fact that it's on your side.
I was on the open banking committee when it started, and it didn't do what it was supposed to do, which was actually to give the consumers the right to their own data. Personally, I think you would be the one positive output from open banking that I've seen. That's a personal view. Are you regulated, John? Hugh Purser would like to know, are you regulated by the financial authorities?
Yes, we're regulated by the FCA for the open banking, AISP, PISP, and money remittance, and we work very closely with a company called Centennial NewPay, so we're an agent of them. So we've got a joint model where we work in partnership.
And he was also curious about regulation or data security issues, especially in the context of banking secrecy laws.
All of that's been built into the open banking. So for us to be regulated within open banking, all of the data security is quite standardized in terms of what third-party providers need to comply with. So yes, that's been a big important part, and security resilience is fundamental to what we do, because ultimately it is we are looking to provide a critical banking service to society.
Mark Cook is asking, do clients create a OneBanks profile or ID, or do you assist access to their digital bank profile? I mean, I would suggest I would put a limit on you. I say, no, this is a Barclays customer using your service. This is a NatWest customer using your service.
It's a great question. We have to onboard the customer ourselves. It's a pretty big question that a lot of open banking companies have been pushing the FCA on, because ultimately, as you say, these customers have already got a bank. We are helping facilitate the bank customers do transactions. However, from a regulatory perspective, we are facilitating a lot of customers in one single location, and therefore we have to do transaction risk monitoring. So we onboard customers, we do PEPs, sanctions checks, we create a risk profile. When you do transactions, we do transaction risk monitoring, and we've got different rules set up on our system, whether it's volume, value, structuring, to try and spot money laundering. I think it is important to note that everybody in the supply chain has the money laundering responsibilities, and yeah, as part of the Payment Service Directive, OneBanks as a payment company does need to onboard customers. But I do recognise the point that a lot of customers have already done this with a bank, and there might potentially be something in the future whereby we can leverage the bank's identity. But that comes back to the earlier point around identity and the fact that in the UK there's no digital identity, so we're not able currently to leverage the identity of the bank. So I do see it as a bit of a challenge, but an opportunity as well to change the way in which we authenticate customers and people interact.
Great. I'm going to try and squeeze in two very fast questions. John Spain believes you should be rolling this out in areas where bank branches have already been closed. They should be the priority. Do you agree?
I agree completely. That's the plan, and hopefully those communities will be reaching out to Link to request support, and subsequently there'll be a review done, and then fingers crossed it'll be OneBanks coming there soon.
And then Jonathan, real quickly, any reaction from the younger age demographics, particularly in the pilot that was conducted?
Yeah, funnily enough, there's quite a lot of younger people who are just quite fascinated. A lot of people still use cash for budgeting reasons. I know when I was a kid, I did that. So a lot of children still come above 18. Still come to withdraw money using the Monzo account, because, as I said, we are moving towards a cardless society, and people carry around their phone. A lot of millennials just carry around their phone, but sometimes need cash. In Denny, Kilwinning, Lochgelly, the pub next door to the co-op in Denny is cash only. So if I'm a teenager, I'll only have my phone, but I still need to pay in cash. So OneBanks is perfect for millennials as well.
Yeah, my barber shop, which I went to yesterday, only takes cash, and this is what happens when I don't pay. Anyway, it's been really good. A final point. Charles Somerin actually makes an excellent point that in a lot of other climates where there were no branches in the first place, the mobiles become ubiquitous. The mother of necessity, really. Here, the challenge with open banking is we're trying to get customers to change their behavior to make the shift, and we've got this, as the French would say, noyau dur, the hard nut of a remainder, one might argue. But I think you've made a compelling point, Duncan, that I think was your mantra there, that the access to digital and access to cash issues need to be solved in tandem. Otherwise, one will be solved to the detriment of the other. And certainly to society's detriment, because we leave behind the poor and the disadvantaged, and that's what we opened with SDG 10. Anyway, I have 3 quick thanks to give. Firstly, to the sponsors before you. I can't imagine any of them not interested in this space, and especially the fact that you're bridging a very, very important divide. Secondly, I would like to thank the audience. It's been particularly vibrant. All of your comments and questions, as I said, will be sent to Duncan. And if you wish to have a look ahead on what's coming up, simply go and look on the website. We do have quite a full program, even over August, so do have a look there. But my thanks mostly to you, Duncan, for breaking what you claim was actually work in Spain, but I'll believe to come and talk to us today and present. And unfortunately, our technology still relies on the analog applause. So here's my analog applause meter, my Korean karmic clapper. Thank you very much for coming on board, and we look forward to great things to come.
Thank you, Michael.